My name is Gurngar, and it is time for another crafty love letter. This will be our final love letter to Zelda for a little bit, and it is to a little tiny creature that has captured my heart, Blupees.
The exact feel and vibe that I wanted to go to recreate was the forest behind Kakariko village where the fairy fountain is. This shot in particular where you can kind of see the fairy fountain plus a Blupee is perfect. I first sketched out the elements that I wanted to add. I knew that I wanted to use this frame that I got as a base. I got it from a hobby store for really cheap. So then I cut out the elements in paper and put them down so I could kind of see the size of everything together to make sure that it all fit. And then we're going to push out the princesses because we do not need them, just a cute blue frame. So say goodbye to them because this is the last time you'll see them. I then created these rough hill shapes out of foam. I then used my knife to give it a better shape. I was not really looking for texture here since I'm going to be covering it all with grass. So I just tried to make it mostly smooth. And here they are, mostly shaped up in the way that I want. I'm now adding a cardboard piece because that's going to be the base for our cliff. I wanted to kind of create an effect where you could see the cliffside and the forest on either side of the frame. For the cliff, I just went ahead and used hot glue to give it that texture. I also just went ahead and added the hill to the bottom of it. And time to create the trees for the other side. I'm going to be honest with you, these are not the favorite trees that I ever made. I decided to use coffee stirring sticks, and I'm not sure if I would go back to this method. But yeah, I added a third one to the back to give it a little bit more support. And now everything just gets some brown Mod Podge. I went with brown because I thought if it shone through, it would look like dirt. And also it would just give a nice base for the trees. So with this final brown Mod Podge, we can let it sit overnight and come back to paint it tomorrow. Except for not really, because while I was resting, I realized something about the game. Everywhere you look, there's so much stone showing. So I had to go back and add the texture. The Mod Podge had dried by this time, and it gave the most unholy nail on the chalkboard sound when I tried to add texture. Be thankful that it is muted. It also just ripped everything because the Mod Podge was dry. Think ahead, kids. Don't be me. That's it. That's your PSA. Let us turn our gaze to something better. Let us make some trees. So normally when you make trees, you're supposed to use a smaller gauge of wire. This is all I had, so it was a big struggle to put it together. But yeah, I just twisted it all up and then untwisted the top a bit so I could have some branches. Here's the completed tree skeleton. I'm sure you're thinking, hey, that doesn't look like a tree, but don't worry. We are going to make it more tree-like with this beautiful, wonderful, terrible air dry clay. It is my current hell to go through this whole tub of clay, so I continue to use it and you'll continue to see me using it. But I basically just covered the whole tree with the clay, not caring too much about it being perfect. I just roughly smoothed it out with my fingers before going in with a toothpick to add more detailed lines and little knots everywhere. I then moved it to some parchment paper before adding some of this chocolate milk brown Mod Podge all over it. And finally, we can move on to painting everything. You will notice that the stone area is darker. I did add a black wash to that because I wanted a deeper stone underlayer. And then with the trees, I am just adding a lighter brown brushing over the top of it. Also making sure to do the same to our big tree, which looks much more tree-like now, before adding some green moss to the bottom of the trees. I then went in with a final layer of a warm brown tone to kind of make sure that everything blends together nicely. Final tree step being adding dark paint to the knots and other parts that I wanted more detail. And then we may move on to our rocks and stones. Again, I did add a black wash over this first, and for that I just used black paint, water, and a little bit of dish soap. And then I went over with lighter grays and whites to add more detail to the stones. And here we are with the painting of our 3D objects all completed. But now we need to paint some more with painting the backdrop. I went ahead and made a cardboard cutout of the scenery so that I knew where I would need to paint the fairy fountain. So after giving myself a rough sketch, it is time to paint. I'm going to be honest with you, I do not know any painting techniques and I have almost no idea what I'm doing. I'm just going with my feeling, and because of that, I'm not going to talk over this part and I'm just going to leave you with some music and a painting montage. Talk to you later. And painting complete. With the painting done, it's time to start putting all of this together, including that green thing, which is going to be kind of like a distant grassy hill. We're going to put down the trees and that hill to cover up all of our hard work. Notice that I'm putting the thicker tree on the right and the skinny tree on the left. That will be relevant in like 3 seconds. So to put together, I just used some tacky glue on the back, putting down first the hill before taking the trees and figuring out where I need to place them. Remember where I said the placements before? Notice I am again putting this skinny tree on the left and the fat tree on the right. For those of you that understand how shapes work and things look backwards, you'll notice I am doing this all wrong. So that when I cut the trees without double checking and then tried to put them in, I am astounded to find it doesn't work. So I just fixed this by cutting the trees and making them very, very small. Which honestly turns out okay in the end because I'm just going to be covering the top part with fake leaves. So I went ahead and covered the edges with masking tape, and it is time to add the wonderful foliage. I'm going to go ahead and put Mod Podge down on the ground and anywhere else where I want the grass to stick. I do not have a static applicator yet, so I just went ahead and sprinkled the grass on. I just used the 4mm and the 7mm alternating between the two before reaching a point that I was pretty happy with. And with that, it's time for cleanup and tapping out any of that extra grass that did not stick, and I did it over paper so I could save those little bits for later. Then to make sure that everything sits there nicely, I sprayed it with first isopropyl alcohol and then some watered down PVA glue to make sure that it all stick. I also went ahead and used some clump foliage, too much glue, and a toothpick to make some shrubs. And now time for the part that looks so relaxing but honestly stressed me out so much, adding all of the foliage to the top of my trees. I just went ahead and put down some PVA glue and then added foliage wherever it made me happy. I did this in layers to make sure that everything stuck there nicely. It stressed me out because every time I would check it, more would fall off. So let's work on the clay bits by first conditioning some blue, lighter blue, yellow, orange, and green clay. We're also going to grab that piece of paper that we had earlier for scale, and then we're going to take it away and ignore it and make these way too big, too chunky boys instead. Want to know how I made them? Well, let's go ahead and make a bigger one together. I first just went ahead and made 2 blue balls and smoothed them out together. After they became one oval, I went ahead and grabbed the lighter blue clay to make a little chest piece. I cut it down to size before attaching it and then adding some fur texture. Let's give this friend some legs by adding some light blue on the darker blue and then putting it onto the body and using our tool to roll it in and blend it. Before adding the arms, we need to add a little bit more detail. So I made some consummate V's with some darker clay, and I'm just folding them and attaching them with my toothpick. And then we can make the arms with pretty much the same way that I made the legs. You can also notice here that I used the wrong shade of blue on the feet. Shh, don't tell anyone. Let's make a face by taking the lighter blue and cutting out a cute little heart and making sure to add the little fur details around the edge. And then we're just gonna slap it on there before realizing it's way too big and making it a little bit smaller. Squish, squish, and then we have a cute little face. I'm also going to use my fingers to make some of that fur more pronounced around the edges. And now we can add the little facial details. I think it's supposed to be based on an owl, so I did it roughly like that. Let's go ahead and add some more details with clay. I cut out these 2 orange circles for the base of the eye. Also, as you witness me throwing our friend down to the ground, I want to mention that I'm working on glass and plastic here. That's the best surface to work on while doing clay because it won't stick on it too badly. And then if you use your knife, you can kind of just unattach it. When I was done with the orange, I also took 2 little yellow circles to complete the eye. For the antlers, I used a skeleton wire to make sure that it was nice and sturdy before gluing on the little nubs with bacon bond. I also realized I needed to move it to parchment paper to bake it correctly, so that was a little bit of a disaster because again, this stuff does not adhere until it's been baked, which is what's going to happen to them right now. I also pulled out a dark pink clay because I realized I wanted to make some fruit to put upon my tree. It is not red because I was hoping it would darken when it baked, but it didn't really. Now let's make some little silent mushrooms by having a circle and then making a little stem out of some rolled out clay and just kind of grabbing the circle, making it a little bit more triangular on my finger. And then finally taking the stem and kind of just plopping it in there. Cute. I didn't make the eyes of the small chunky boys with clay, so I'm going to go ahead and do them with Posca markers once they've been baked and cooled. I also attached the antlers to our bigger friend with some super glue to make sure that it was nice and sturdy. Bloop, bloop. And then we are all done and the family has finally been reunited. I then didn't add the orange earlier to the little nubs, so I'm gonna again take my Posca markers and go ahead and add the orange around to all of the ends. And here we are, all finished. One of the main defining features of Kakariko Village are the poles with the ropes attached to them, so I'm gonna go ahead and make that out of chopsticks. which I need to cut down to size, and creating some supporting beam friends that will be tied to the side with some rope. Before painting them, I wanted to create some better definition with my knife and later a ball tool. These are wooden beams that have been sitting outside for a long time, so I wanted them to have some weathering and wear on them. And instead of painting these all over, since they are wood and have wood texture on them, I decided to just add a brown wash. And this wash is just watered down brown paint with a little bit of dish soap so it flows into the crevices a little bit nicer. And when we're done with that, let's take it away to dry and return back to our freshly baked clay. You may have noticed our little friends do not have their little antler nubs yet. So what I'm going to do is first paint the edges with Posca markers again before grabbing them and gluing them all on with hot glue. Boop, 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 and we're all done. We're then going to make some nightshade with pretty much the same method. We can now go ahead and start placing everything in there with some hot glue. First, I went ahead and glued in the shrubs and our main Blupee before gluing in our nightshade, and then finally some mushroom friends. I then turned it upside down so I could glue in our apples to make sure that they stuck correctly. And with that, the actual diorama part is pretty much finished. But before saying we're actually done, I need to finish those outside poles first. So now that the wash is dry, I'm going to go in with some lighter brown dry brushing to pull out those details that we created earlier. Then to ensure that they can actually stand up, I'm going to go ahead and use my foam and my knife to shave two little hill bases for them. And with them all shaped up, I'm going to go ahead and add brown Mod Podge again before sticking the poles in and doing the same grass method that I did earlier. This time I'm actually just using grass that was left over from the main diorama. While waiting for the grass to dry, I went ahead and took my foam scraps to make the tokens that hang from the rope. The ugly contraption that you see in the back is how I'm going to hang the tokens to dry throughout the many steps. I first went ahead and added some white Mod Podge to it so that it could seal it and add as a primer. So when each token was fully dunked and coated, I just hung it up in the back until it looked like this. And while that dries, let us return to our poles because it is time for the rope. Before we do the rope though, I want to add one more Blupee friend to the base, so I'm going to go ahead and hot glue him there so he can stay. Now time to finally add the rope by just adding some hot glue to the pole and then twisting the twine around it. I did basically the same thing for the support beam, and by that I just first glued down the beam before hot gluing the twine on before twisting it around and around. I also glued a little mushroom friend down onto the base for some fun. So looking at the diorama while working, I realized that I kind of really wanted another grassy texture in the front, so I decided to make a fern. I first did that by cutting cardboard into strips before painting it a few different shades of green. Once that was dry, I took the strips and twirled them into spirals. I then glued it down into a little trio before taking my tiny little cutters to cut a little leaf pattern into it. I tried to make careful, gentle little cuts so that I wouldn't accidentally cut out. Anyways, so now one side is a little shorter. And here's our friend all glued in, pat, pat. Time to return to our tokens now that the base is dry. I went ahead and painted all of the tokens in a vibrant red before hanging up the completed ones to dry, and while they're hanging up, I gave them black wash so that they would be less vibrant. Here they're getting a dry brushing in a light pink to give it some more features, before painting the final black stripes that all of the tokens need to be completed. Here they all are completed and laying out in the final pattern that they will be put onto the rope. As you can see, I achieved this by using a toothpick to shove the rope through the tokens. And now with them all on there, it is time to finally put together the gate. While I work on attaching the rope in the background, I just wanted to say thank you very much for watching my videos. And if you are enjoying what you see, please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if there's anything that you'd like to see me make. And with that, we are finally finished and it is time for our final shots. And with that, we've reached the end of our video. Thanks again for watching, and here's a little preview for what I'm going to make next. See you next time.